on a Wednesday. Johnny Mac, welcome back. Happy New Year, pal. How are you?
Doing well. Happy New Year to you, Mike, and welcome back.
Thank you. So I was in Baltimore driving around. I was listening to the Sports Bash on my 97.3 ESPN mobile app, and I heard this conversation.
Nice plug, by the way.
You're welcome. I heard this conversation between you and Shander that you would like potentially your intro music changed.
Well, if you remember, going back to the original, I wanted Bobby Roode's Glorious.
That's
because
right.
I felt that better represented me. But you already gave it away to Casey Joyner. So I was just explaining that to Eitan. I'm very happy with my music, even though I think I should have had the choice before Casey.
Well, I think that as the season went on and the Eagles weren't as glorious, that Casey maybe lost that music. We might have changed it off a little bit. Well, I'll have to see. But 2019, there's a possibility that we could freshen up your music.
Well, I think I think it's fair to describe this segment as glorious, and that's why I thought that would be the proper music.
Although I feel that the man who uses that music is becoming somewhat irrelevant.
Yeah, it's not about the man. Obviously, if you want to go the iconic version, which I also explained to Eitan, it's a better fit with Ric Flair. Yeah, Bobby Roode's a nothing, but
yeah,
the music is phenomenal.
Yes, it's a very good song. All right. Who knew that we'd be sitting here talking about a playoff game, right? I mean, here they are getting ready for this Bears team. So we had talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and Eitan disagreed with me, but I said if the Eagles were to get in, they would have won 5 out of 6, 3 in a row, and they would become the team that nobody would want to play. Do you view the Eagles as the team that nobody wants to play?
Well, I wouldn't want to play them. We finally got a chance to talk to Matt Nagy today and kind of ask him why he went the way he did in Week 17 and playing his starters and winning the game versus sort of manipulating things and playing the Vikings in the playoffs, which I think would have been a much easier matchup for them. And he just kind of leaned back on the old school mentality of there were too many scenarios to worry about it, so you just play to win the game. Ultimately, I think it's a mistake. I've said that from the start. I think styles make fights. I think the Bears are very talented. I'm not saying they can't win the football game, but the strength of their team is their defensive front. And one of the strengths of the Eagles is their offensive line. So on a given game day, when you have Lane Johnson and Jason Kelsey and Jason Peters, if they bring their A game and they nullify that pass rush, I don't like the Bears' chances.
Right.
And that's something like that was never going to happen against Minnesota, which has one of the worst offensive lines in the league.
Yeah, I mean, I say the same. I don't know what the Bears' thought process was. The only thing I can maybe come up with is, hey, look, the division rivals, you don't want to play the same team 3 times. But if you're asking me, if I'm Chicago, I'd rather play Minnesota.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty simple decision. And I was and I am going to vote for Matt Nagy as Coach of the Year. I think he's done an amazing job with that team. But I think he made a bad decision. And from his standpoint, I think there's going to be a lot more questions. Obviously, it goes away if they win the football game. If they lose this game, he's going to get a lot of criticism.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to start with Golden Tate. He's been here for half the season now. Is he just an irrelevant part of this offense, or do we anticipate that there is a new wrinkle that could be entering the offense as we hit the postseason?
No, I think he's a part of it. The problem is they have earmarked him as the third receiver, and they've decided they're better when they play 2 tight ends. So it's going to be a limited role, and he's going to be the slot receiver basically on third downs. And against Washington. Nobody noticed because that game was such a blowout. He had some traffic, and he's had traffic in certain games. But it's clear that Doug Peterson and Mike Gill believe their two best receivers are Alshon Jeffrey and Nelson Agholor. So he's got a limited role because they want to play more two tight ends, and especially this week when you need the extra tight end to help chip Khalil Mack. I think, if anything, he'll be scaled back a little bit more this week. But by and large, if they win, if they continue to go on, he's going to be that third receiver in third down packages.
That doesn't sound like a great trade for a third-round pick. John McMullen with us here. All right, so I want to. You mentioned the offensive line, the Eagles' offensive line. What happens? Sayamala's got to be getting clear. What happens in that spot?
Well, he is getting close, and they had a walkthrough practice today, so it's not a full practice till tomorrow. But he wasn't even on the injury report, so that's a clear indication that he's going to be ready to be active. But I think the way they're playing, same thing with Nick Foles at a more important position, but especially against this Chicago team, they're not going to change anything. And Wisniewski's been the left guard. He's playing well. He's a veteran guy. He understands how to play. I don't think they're going to mess with that this week against that Chicago front.
Yeah, and then you talk about that front. You got Mack. He moves all over the place. So, obviously, I think when the Eagles saw him in Oakland, Lane Johnson had a nice game against him, but the Bears use him a little differently.
Yeah, I wrote about that today on 973 ESPN.com. He totally shut down Khalil Mack last year when he was in Oakland. And that was, Lane Johnson dominated against everybody last year during an all-pro season. Hasn't been quite as good this year, but he's been getting better as the season wore on. And that's what I said when you talk about that offensive line. From the Eagles' perspective, they at least have the opportunity to slow this defensive line down. It's a very talented group. It's a top 5 offensive line in this league, and Lane Johnson is one of those guys. And he's done it in the past, and I think you'll see Khalil Mack move over to the right side of the defense against left tackle Jason Peters a little bit more, because he kind of knows Lane shut him down.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think that the Bears try to get Mack more lined up on Peters and just say, we'll take our chances that Peters is aging and lost a step?
I do. I think that's the plan. But a couple things from that. He's more comfortable on the other side. He generally always played there with the Raiders. So, and if you look at his production this year, 8 of his 13 sacks came from the left end position. 30 of the 49 hurries came from the left end position. That's where he's better at. But I think they'll put him at right end more because they think that's a better matchup with Jason Peters. And I got news for you. Now, Jason's had trouble. I think one of the issues you have to be very, very wary of is there have been a number of times where Jason has not been able to finish games and, in fact, has left early. That can't happen because all of a sudden, if it's Halapoulivaati Vaitai out there, then you got a big problem. But Jason Peters can still play. And if he can fight through it, if the quad's not bothering him, if the biceps aren't bothering him, he's going to play well. And this is what I'm saying, styles make fights. I don't like this matchup from the Bears' perspective.
I talked about this at the beginning of the show, that Nick Foles deserves a lot of credit, but he's not the number one reason. It just happens to be that the defense is getting some turnovers and they're getting healthier, and a lot of things have come into place here. However, he certainly has a big role in what has gone on here, and he's a little banged up this week. But when you look at this offense, is it Nick Foles, what he's doing, or has Doug Peterson changed a bit?
I think a little bit of both. I think I'm getting yelled at by Bob Groats. Tell me if Alshon Jeffrey talks in the locker room. But But yeah, I think it's part both in the fact that Doug has admitted behind the scenes that he and Nick kind of know each other a little bit better. I think he feels more comfortable calling plays for Nick Foles. I think the biggest reason why is that Carson Wentz it sort of craves autonomy at the line of scrimmage. He wants to be able to do a lot of things at the line of scrimmage, whereas Nick Foles, to be honest, likes to be told what to do. And I think Doug Peterson is more comfortable with the latter. So I think the game plans are better. I think the play calling's better. But I also think you have to give just due to Nick Foles. He's playing great. Yeah. He really is. His third down numbers are unbelievable. He's been the best passer in this league over the last 3 weeks of the season. He's playing with incredible confidence. He sets a new record every week. It was the franchise passing yards record against Houston, 25 straight completions against the Houston Texans.
Most 400-yard games in franchise history.
Yeah, I mean, the guy has been playing off the charts to where I'm at the point, Mike, I don't know where you are, but I think the Eagles are going to push off the extension for Carson Wentz. I now think there's a chance they pick up the option on Nick Foles because they can afford it for one more year. Man. I'm not sure that
oh man
is going to
I don't know, man. We talked about this before you came on. I almost feel this is going in the territory of when Garcia was here, and they couldn't bring Garcia back because if he was standing on that sideline, there would have been anarchy.
That's the problem. And by the way, while I say that, I'm going to say this as well. I think if they lose this week, I don't think it's going to happen. But I think at some point, if you win this game, and if you beat a 12-win team, and you win a trip basically to New Orleans, and you're in the divisional round, I think then it becomes a legitimate question of you don't want to move on from Nick Foles. The other issues you have to entertain are how does this affect Carson Wentz mentally?
Right. How does he step back in? It almost, even if they lose this week, I get it, it probably blows over a little bit more. But it's almost like how does he re-win back over, forget the fans, how does he re-win back over that locker room?
Yeah, and that's the problem, and I think that's why I've been steadfastly against it throughout pretty much this entire process. But at some point, you have to admit you're wrong, and if a guy keeps winning games, I mean, if you take this all the way out, Mike, if they go to the Super Bowl again, what do? You can't move on from Nick Foles. You can't.
How much success would this team need to have for them to reconsider Wentz as their guy?
Well, I think if they win the Super Bowl, I think that's when you reconsider the entire thing and realize you got to move forward with Nick Foles. I think anything less than that, you try to put it off a year, another year, and you try to manage the personalities, which has been the strength of Doug Peterson. I would argue the strength of Doug Peterson. And if they lose this game, I think you just move on. I think you go back to Carson Wentz. I think it becomes more difficult long-term if you win this game. I really do. Mm-hmm. So, I've joked in the past that this is another week. This is the third straight week that the Eagles haven't practiced on Wednesday. And that's not normal in the NFL. This is usually the heaviest day of practicing, and the Eagles have gone through to a walkthrough method and then practicing on Thursdays. It's almost like they don't want to succeed, but they keep succeeding. And it's a testament to Nick Foles because he doesn't lose, and it's pretty amazing.
It's unbelievable. I mean, it's almost like, when I go back to that Garcia year, it's similar. They were 5-6. He comes in, they get blown out against the Colts, and then they win 5 in a row. So I mean, it's a little, but they get in, they beat the Giants, they play the Saints in the second round, and they end up losing that game. But if you have something like that happen, and you mentioned they might have to reconsider the extension for Wentz, and then figuring out a way to bring Wentz Foles back, which would be what, on a franchise in him?
Well, no, he's got a mutual option, and if the Eagles agree to pick it up, they would have to pay him $20 million next year, which obviously you cannot do for a backup quarterback. Now, on the other hand, he can pay $2 million to get his free agency, and you know this league, and you know the going rate for quarterbacks. He's played himself into that conversation again, where he's going to earn over $20 million. So it comes down to the fact you have to really sort of get together with Nick Foles and say, we want you. If we can get you at that $20 million number and pay Carson Wentz the final year of his deal, you could do it financially. The issues become, as we said, behind the scenes.
Well, right, exactly. I mean, is Nick? I know he doesn't probably give much, and he says all the right things, but is he at the point where he feels I want to be a backup again and put myself in this, or I'm ready to go be a quarterback, a starting quarterback? I mean, he might say, I love it here. I'll come back and be in this role again.
Well, he does love it here. There's no question about that. But I think people who assume he's happy as a backup are incorrect. He's like every professional athlete. He's very competitive. He certainly understands he should be a starting quarterback in this league. He does have a family now. It is a short shelf life to make a whole heck of a lot of money. So I do think he wants to be a starter. I think he'd prefer to be a starter here. And the reality is, from a skill set standpoint, Carson Wentz is better. But they win football games with Nick Foles. It's a really difficult decision. It really is, because they keep winning. And every step further, if they beat the Bears, if they go to New Orleans, which I can't imagine they would beat that team, it becomes more difficult. It really does.
Never seen anything like it, man.
No, there's never been. There's not another comparison. There isn't.
I mean, the Garcia one's a little, because he was just, John, he was so popular, they could not bring him back.
Well, yeah, but, I mean, and he did a good job. But understand, Nick Foles has won a Super Bowl. You know what that meant emotionally to this city.
Yes.
I don't have to tell you that. You already had people saying he should be the starter just because he won the Super Bowl. Then you put into the equation his numbers as a starting quarterback at what I think 22-7, I think we're up to in his last 29 starts as an Eagles quarterback. It's different. I mean, he I just mentioned, sets a franchise record every week. Reuben Frank, who I like a lot, just wrote this week he's the best quarterback in this franchise's history, which I don't agree with. But I said you could at least make the argument now.
Well, I was saying this earlier. You're most likely going to see this kid get put in the Ring of Honor, the Eagles Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. And then think about, you and I have had this discussion a ton with Eli Manning, with the people. Their only bullet point for Eli Manning being a Hall of Fame quarterback is he's won 2 Super Bowls. Well, what if Nick Foles wins 2 Super Bowls?
Yeah.
Is he a Hall of Fame quarterback?
Oh, I said the same thing. I can't imagine any Eagle fan in their right mind telling me, advocating that Eli Manning would be the guy that you would select to be your quarterback based on the fact that he's won 2 Super Bowl MVPs.
No, I agree with you. You know where I am on that, and I don't think – I'm not trying to say Nick Foles is a Hall of Fame quarterback, because he's not. But as far as a Ring of Honor, yeah, I mean, just winning that Super Bowl probably gets him over that barrier. And the emotion part of it, that makes it a more difficult decision for the Eagles. And you know how when professional sports teams make decisions based on emotion, it usually doesn't work out very well.
No.
I would still tell you, long-term, Carson Wentz is the way better bet for this organization. But what I'm trying to say this entire time is that decision is becoming more difficult by the day.
Mike Wallace, in or out?
Most likely not going to play. He was listed as limited, which is an estimation today because it's a walkthrough. But Doug mentioned Monday he was just going to do individual work this week. So I would say we'll have a much clearer indication tomorrow. But I would say it's trending into the unlikely territory.
Do you like this matchup?
With the Bears, yeah. I mean, I said it from day one. I said it driving down to Washington and FedEx Field before they kicked off. I told Scott Grayson, if the Eagles win, which I expected them to do, and the Bears won, I think that matchup favors the Eagles. You're talking about a Super Bowl winning quarterback who's red hot against a raw second-year quarterback who's going to be starting his first ever playoff game. And I just mentioned some of the styles, some of the matchups.
Yeah.
The strength of the Bears is their defensive front, and one of the strengths of the Eagles is their offensive line. So instead of strength versus weakness, it's strength versus strength. I don't like that matchup for the Bears.
I feel that, John, there's a team all the time that had a really good regular season kind of out of nowhere, and then they get to the playoffs and they're one and done. It's like, man, you played that whole season. What a fun year, fun ride. And in one weekend, you're out in the NFL. And that's the NFL. And I feel that the Bears might be that team.
Yeah, and it usually has to do with a young quarterback who is.
It was the Rams last year, by the way. It was the Rams last year.
Yeah, young quarterback experiencing the playoffs for the first time.
Yep.
And I think Trubisky is even a rawer quarterback than Jared Goff was at the time. I think Matt Nagy has done a wonderful job scheming up easy completions for him and doing a lot of amazing things. But I don't like. I'm in your camp with this one. I do not like this matchup from the Bears' perspective.
Yeah. A lot of coaching stuff we will dive into on tomorrow's show. We'll get into the game a little bit more. Antonio Brown. There's so much going on in the NFL. Fun week. Eagles and Bears this Sunday. Countdown to kickoff, 1 p.m. Mosher, McMullen, Krause back tomorrow night, 6 o'clock. Landmark Americana. Thanks, pal.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.